The husband's mistress pushed a pregnant wife down the stairs, unaware her father was the city's police chief. Those words would come later. At first, it didn't feel like a crime. It felt like a mistake. A secret. A choice that could still be undone. Deserves more. Those words stayed with Ethan Carter long after he heard them. At first, it was harmless. That's how he justified it. Conversations over lunch that ran too long, messages late at night that felt easier than talking at home, complaints about marriage framed as jokes, laughter covering resentment. Then the jokes stopped sounding like jokes. Pregnancy changes women, Ethan said one evening, trying to sound casual. She's always tired, always emotional. Vanessa Reed leaned closer, her perfume faint but deliberate. Her voice dropped just enough to feel intimate. That doesn't mean you stop being a man. Ethan didn't pull away. He told himself it was temporary, a distraction, a mistake he could manage. He never intended for it to become serious, at least, that's what he told himself. But Vanessa took everything seriously. She always had. Vanessa wasn't reckless, she was calculated. She listened more than she spoke, learned people's weaknesses, waited patiently for cracks to form. And Ethan, despite his confidence, was full of them. At home, Grace Carter was 6 months pregnant. She moved slower now, her body carrying more than weight, hope, fear, expectation. The nursery walls were still bare, but she had already imagined the room filled with soft light, tiny clothes folded neatly, a future that felt real and close. Ethan smiled when he left in the mornings, kissed her forehead, asked how she slept. But something had shifted. Grace noticed it in the small things first, the unfamiliar perfume clinging to Ethan's jacket, the way he flinched when she touched his phone, the irritation in his voice when she mentioned future plans. One evening, they sat across from each other at the dining table. The food had gone cold. "Ethan," Grace said softly, "are you happy?" He froze just for half a second, but it was enough. "Why would you ask that?" he replied, forcing a smile. "I don't know," she said honestly. "You just feel far away." Ethan pushed his chair back slightly. "You're overthinking pregnancy hormones." The words landed harder than he intended. Grace nodded slowly, swallowing the lump in her throat. "I'm sorry," she whispered. That night she lay awake, with one hand resting on her belly. The baby kicked softly, unaware of the tension surrounding its existence. Grace whispered a prayer, simple, desperate. "Protect us." Vanessa learned about the pregnancy by accident. Ethan had left his phone on the table during lunch. The screen lit up with a photo notification, an ultrasound image, grainy and unmistakable. Vanessa stared at it longer than she should have. Pregnancy meant permanence. And Vanessa hated losing. Something dark stirred inside her, not fear, not guilt, but competition. She had never been the type to step aside quietly. If something stood between her and what she wanted, she moved it. She did confront Ethan right away. Instead, she watched, listened, tested boundaries. "Does she know about us?" Vanessa asked one afternoon, her tone light. "No," Ethan said quickly, "and she never will." Vanessa smiled. "That must be exhausting, lying all the time." Ethan laughed nervously. "It's under control." Vanessa didn't argue, she never did when she was planning. Grace's unease followed her everywhere. At the grocery store, she felt eyes on her back. At the pharmacy, she noticed a woman standing too close, pretending to browse the same shelf. She told herself she was imagining things, pregnancy stress, anxiety, anything but reality. Still, she began locking the door twice, checking the hallway before stepping out, keeping her phone charged at all times. She mentioned it once to Ethan. "I feel like someone's watching me," she said quietly. He sighed, already distracted. "You're scaring yourself." That was when she stopped talking about it. Grace learned something important in those days. Fear is easier to carry alone than to explain to someone who doesn't want to hear it. Vanessa followed Grace home one afternoon. She kept her distance, careful, blending into the city crowd. She didn't feel like a criminal. She felt justified. Grace was standing in the stairwell of her apartment building when Vanessa approached her for the first time. "You're in my way." The words were calm, controlled. Grace turned slowly. She recognized the face immediately, from social media, from instinct, from the quiet dread she'd been carrying for weeks. "Please," Grace said, stepping back instinctively. "I don't want trouble." Vanessa smiled. "This ends when you stop standing between me and my future." Grace reached for the railing. Then came the shove. Grace didn't scream. She fell. The world tilted, shattered, rushed past her in fragments, metal railing, concrete steps, pain exploding through her body. Her head struck hard. Darkness closed in. Vanessa stood frozen for a moment, breath uneven. Then she ran. The hospital corridor smelled of antiseptic and fear. Chief Daniel Carter stood rigid, his posture commanding even in silence. Only his eyes betrayed him, searching the corridor urgently, scanning faces, machines, doors, as if willing answers to appear. "Where is my daughter?" he asked quietly. The nurse hesitated, then straightened under the weight of his authority. "Third door on the left, sir." Daniel nodded once and moved forward. Linda Carter was already there, seated on a plastic chair outside the ICU. Her hands were clasped tightly in her lap. When she saw her husband, she stood abruptly, tears spilling now that she no longer had to be strong alone. "She's still unconscious," she whispered. "They say the baby." Her voice broke. Daniel wrapped an arm around his wife, steadying her. He said nothing, but his jaw tightened. Through the glass panel, Grace lay motionless. And in that moment, the city's most powerful lawman wasn't a chief. He was a father. Doctors worked through the night. Grace survived. The baby survived. But the truth was no longer hidden. When Daniel Carter learned the details, every message, every threat, every step Vanessa had taken, something changed. This wasn't just a family matter, it was a crime. And it would be treated like one. Ethan sat alone in the empty apartment, staring at his phone as investigators knocked on the door. Vanessa sat in her car across the city, hands shaking, realizing too late that she hadn't just pushed a woman down the stairs. She had pushed herself into the light. And once the truth starts moving forward, it doesn't stop. The city woke the next morning unaware that something irreversible had already happened. Traffic crawled, coffee shops opened, phones buzzed with ordinary complaints, but inside the trauma wing of St. Matthew's Hospital, time moved differently. Grace Carter lay still, machines humming softly around her. Every beep was a reminder that she was alive and that she had almost not been. Chief Daniel Carter hadn't left the hospital since arriving. He stood near the glass, hands clasped behind his back, watching doctors and nurses move around his daughter with careful precision. He knew this environment well. He had stood in hospital corridors before, waiting on victims, families, outcomes, but never like this, never for Grace. A doctor finally stepped out. "She's stable," he said, "both mother and baby, but she has a concussion, internal bruising, and severe trauma from the fall. She'll need time." Daniel nodded slowly. "Thank you." The doctor hesitated. "We've alerted law enforcement. This wasn't an accident." Daniel met his gaze. "I know." Detective Marcus Hale was assigned the case within the hour. He was thorough, calm, and immune to pressure, one of the few Daniel trusted implicitly. "The stairwell camera was damaged," Marcus said later that morning, flipping through a tablet. "But neighboring cameras caught a woman entering the building around the time of the incident. She left less than 3 minutes later." "Running?" Daniel asked. "Yes." Marcus paused. We also pulled phone records. Grace received threatening messages from an unknown number days before the fall. We traced the burner phone. Daniel's jaw tightened. To whom? Marcus didn't answer immediately. He turned the tablet so Daniel could see. Vanessa Reed. Silence stretched between them. So it's not just assault, Daniel said quietly. It's premeditated. Marcus nodded. And there's more. Ethan Carter didn't answer the door at first. When he finally did, his face was pale, his eyes red. He already knew why they were there. We need you to come with us, Marcus said calmly. Ethan didn't resist. He didn't argue. He looked relieved, as if part of him had been waiting to be stopped. At the station, the truth spilled out faster than Marcus expected. I never thought she'd hurt Grace, Ethan said, voice breaking. I thought I could control it. Control what? Marcus asked. The situation, Ethan whispered. Vanessa, the lies, I told myself it would end. Marcus leaned forward. Did Grace tell you she felt unsafe? Ethan closed his eyes. Yes. And you did nothing. Ethan nodded, tears falling freely now. I didn't want my life to fall apart. Marcus's voice was steady. It already did. Vanessa was arrested at her apartment that evening. She answered the door in a silk robe, makeup flawless, expression confused. Vanessa Reed, Marcus said, you're under arrest for aggravated assault and attempted manslaughter. Her composure cracked instantly. This is a misunderstanding. Marcus didn't raise his voice. You pushed a pregnant woman down a flight of stairs. Vanessa's smile trembled. She slipped. Marcus stepped closer. We have your messages, your movements, your silence after the fall. The color drained from her face. As she was led away, neighbors whispered, phones recorded. Vanessa kept her head high, but her hands were shaking. For the first time, she understood something terrifying. She was no longer in control of the narrative. Grace woke up 3 days later. Her head throbbed, her body felt heavy, but the first thing she did was reach for her belly. The baby kicked. Tears slid down her temples as relief washed over her. Her mother was there instantly. You're safe, Linda whispered. You're both safe. Grace tried to speak, her throat burned. Dad, she managed. Daniel stepped forward, taking her hand gently, carefully, as if she might break. I'm here, he said. I'm not going anywhere. Grace's eyes filled. She pushed me, she whispered. She said I was in her way. Daniel squeezed her hand. I know. The trial began 6 weeks later. The courtroom was packed. Reporters filled the back rows. The city had learned who Grace Carter's father was and what that meant. Vanessa sat at the defense table, dressed modestly, her confidence replaced by restraint. She avoided looking at Grace. Ethan sat separately, charged with criminal negligence and obstruction. The prosecution laid out the case with precision. Messages, witnesses, medical testimony, patterns of obsession and escalation. Grace testified calmly, her voice steady despite the weight of the room. She told me I was in her way, Grace said. She pushed me. I remember falling. I remember thinking my baby was going to die. Vanessa cried softly. When Vanessa took the stand, her story shifted constantly. I didn't mean to hurt her. I was emotional. I just wanted him to choose me. The prosecutor didn't flinch. You chose violence. Vanessa had no answer. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. When they returned, the room was silent. On the charge of attempted manslaughter, the foreperson said, we find the defendant guilty. Vanessa sobbed openly now, collapsing against her chair. On the charge of aggravated assault on a pregnant woman, guilty. Ethan closed his eyes. He was found guilty of criminal negligence. Justice didn't sound dramatic, it sounded final. Vanessa was sentenced to prison time, mandatory counseling, and a permanent criminal record. The judge's voice was measured. You believed desire justified harm, it does not. Ethan received probation, mandatory programs, and a lifetime of consequences he could never fully escape. Grace didn't attend sentencing. She didn't need to. Months passed. Grace moved into a new home, quiet, filled with light. Therapy helped, time helped, distance helped. She gave birth on a rainy morning. A healthy baby, a strong cry. Daniel held his grandchild with tears in his eyes. "You're safe," he whispered, "I promise." Grace smiled weakly. "I know." Vanessa learned in prison that attention isn't the same as importance, that power built on harm collapses quickly. Ethan learned that silence can be as destructive as violence. Grace learned something else entirely. That strength isn't endurance. That love never demands silence. That choosing yourself is sometimes the bravest thing you can do. One evening, Grace stood on her porch, baby in her arms, the city quiet around her. For the first time since the fall, she felt whole. Not because she forgot, but because she survived. This story isn't just about betrayal or punishment. It's about listening to fear before it becomes tragedy. About understanding that silence protects no one. Some stories don't end happily. But this one ended honestly. And sometimes that's stronger than a happy ending.